Good morning. It's August 6, 2014. This is a special broadcast of the I-24 News Morning Edition. Today marks the 30th day since the start of Operation Protective Edge and the second day of an Egyptian-brokered ceasefire intended to lead to a longer-term ceasefire. The ceasefire came into force yesterday morning with Hamas firing a barrage of rockets minutes before and then fell quiet. Israeli military leaders maintain they delivered a, quote, serious blow to Hamas, including destroying all of its known cross-border tunnels, and have reiterated the IDF is prepared to restart military action if needed. IDF troops withdrew from Gaza, and Israeli and Palestinian delegations are in Cairo for indirect ceasefire talks. With me this morning is Halit Barel, the former director at the Israeli National Security Council and a member of the Council for Peace and Security. Good morning, Halit.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us. Tal Shalev, I-24 News diplomatic correspondent, and Ali Waqid, I-24 News senior Middle East analyst. Ali, I want to start with you. Day one of the ceasefire has passed. Hamas is quiet. Are they quiet because there's been success in Cairo?
No, there is no yet success in Cairo, but Hamas want to be quiet because the population need this quiet, and because the Egyptian want this quiet, and because Hamas want to do everything in order to be accepted by the Egyptians, to be reintegrated in this process that is taking place in Cairo. We know that Hamas is not satisfied with the conditions, or at least with the priorities of the Egyptians. The Hamas are trying to impose the equation of calm for a blockade and not calm for calm, as the Egyptians are trying to establish. And we see the IDF spoke that they are ready to relaunch the attack if Israel is once again attacked. And the same statement we heard yesterday by the spokesperson of the military wing of Hamas, that the fighters of Hamas is still on very high alert and ready to go back to the fights if it is needed. And it is needed. It would be needed if the delegation in Egypt, and yesterday what the development of yesterday is the fact that the delegation from Gaza at the end of the day reached Egypt, and Gaza is represented in the Palestinian delegation, which make a huge difference in my opinion. Hamas is waiting to see what are the results of these ceasefire. Hamas do not intend to go back to the fight. In any case, Hamas is not anticipating any return to the fight. The question is for Hamas, what would be the price for this attitude? Will the Egyptians be ready to say that the talks with the over the blockade will start at this round, or would it be postponed for later? How much later? If would Hamas be part of this later talks about the blockade? In any case, Hamas delegation will go back to Gaza, saying that it will be the call for calm as first result, but Hamas will have the possibility to say that for the first time since 2006-2007, the blockade is on the table, and that the parties are negotiating the lifting of the blockade and some measures that aim to improve, to change the life of the population.
So the first round of criticism towards Hamas would probably, couldn't they have done this without the 29 days of war?
This is why Hamas is insisting on having something to raise it when they say blockade. They will say there will be some measures of lifting the blockade, some more merchandises going inside the Gaza Strip, maybe the opening of the Rafah crossing, which I'm not sure that the Egyptians will open soon, the terminal of Rafah. But in any case, they would say that without this 29 days, the blockade won't be on the table negotiated between Israelis, Palestinians, and the Egyptians.
And Halit, when you look at it from an Israeli perspective, they will say this is the same, ceasefire, generally speaking, that we were ready to sign even before we put it on our ground troops. What has Israel gained from these 29 days of war?
And it has been said that in terms of Hamas's calculations, that it's unclear why this couldn't have been reached at least 3 weeks ago. From the Israeli perspective, I think what's happening now is a bit of a war on narratives who won the war.
Right.
But analyzing Hamas, it's really hard to say, as I think Ali was saying, and at least the subtext of his words is that it's hard for them to show any real achievement in terms of the salaries, in terms of the openings of the passages, and in terms of certainly releasing prisoners. So there's no...
And the damage done to the Gaza Strip.
No, definitely the damage. So there's no tangible achievement that you can present vis-a-vis the damage. So I think it's a very precarious position, regardless of what they're saying. From an Israeli perspective, I mean, look, the tunnel issue had to be dealt with. In the past, it's been dealt with in a different way. Under Prime Minister Olmert, there had been incursions into the Gaza Strip to deal with this issue. After 2008, those had stopped, as far as I know, and so there was a mass threat on the border that had to be dealt with. I think that is a tangible achievement. I think there's also an achievement in terms of destruction of Hamas, although not the military leadership of Hamas. And there's a question there to begin with: how much did Israel want to target the leadership of Hamas, wanting to keep Hamas deterred, weakened, but as an address, someone to organize and work against in the Gaza Strip.
Just about the tangible achievements, I think the Egyptians do not share the issue of the achievements with the Israelis. They don't think that Hamas was touched by this operation, and they are speaking about between percentages of 15 to 25 the infrastructures of the Hamas military wing, and they speak that Hamas had some psychological achievements in bringing like 5 million Israelis to the shelters, the operations that they did behind the lines of the IDF, and the Egyptians are doing everything in order not to allow Hamas translating this psychological, some military achievements into a political achievement. This is why the Egyptians' position is even more firm than the Israeli
one. The Egyptian position had been firmer in a way all along than the Israeli position in a certain sense.
Yeah, and I'm afraid that the Egyptians that will not allow the Israelis and the Palestinians to find a way.
I agree. I think this is an issue to really take note of, because I think to begin with, some of the Hamas demands had been vis-a-vis Egypt all along, and not all of them, and maybe not necessarily the main ones, but some significant ones were vis-a-vis Egypt, and Israel in a way was paying the price for. So it's fine for Egypt to want the parties to keep warring or to not weigh in strongly enough, but I think also, and this would be interesting, I think, to hear from you as well, Sisi, I think, is finding that his public also has an opinion that might not correlate with his own. So Egypt finally did bring its weight to the table, but it took a while.
I just want Tal to jump in here, of course, from the Israeli side.
Well, just to say that inside, we're talking here as if the operation is ended, and there is a common knowledge that the negotiations in Cairo will yield some tangible results. But inside the Israeli Security Cabinet, last night there was a very long meeting. It's, the Israeli Prime Minister and the Defense Minister are not just saying that the operation isn't over. Israel does not see the operation is over. There is a cautious optimism that the talks in Cairo could yield some results, but there is this question about the interests and how all of these interests converge together, and can they create some big achievement for Hamas. It is true that the Israeli narrative is that Hamas has been crushed, but Israel is still, and many cabinet ministers are skeptical about the Egyptian initiative really presenting some achievement at the end, and coming back to quiet to the calm for calm equation is not acceptable for many of the Israeli security cabinet ministers, and many of them are still speaking about after these 3-day ceasefire, maybe 5-day ceasefire, maybe the ceasefire will be extended. We could definitely see Israel moving forward after that into another move into the Gaza Strip. It's true, the Israeli Prime Minister is reluctant to do so. Yesterday, the Channel 2 was leaked the plans that the IDF presented of how the horrific price of reconquering Gaza. We're talking. Apparently, it was a very detailed plan talking about 5 years of IDF presence in the Gaza Strip, millions of shekels, billions of shekels, and second Lebanon. We're going back to
war of attrition almost.
South Lebanon, and Netanyahu is definitely not pushing for a ground offensive. But some in the Israeli cabinet do think that the negotiations will fail. Hamas will not be able to get any big achievement from this. and then will resort back to fighting.
Is this because, though, that they don't trust the Egyptians, or there's a lack of international broker that they do trust?
Well, I think it's also because they're not ready to make the concessions that Israel is demanded to make in order to Hamas. Both Israel and Egypt will have to give in to Hamas in order to open up the suffocation of the Gaza Strip. Both Israel and Egypt have to pay some political price for doing so. I'm not sure that Sisi is willing to do so, and the pressure will be on Netanyahu. But at the same time, the Palestinian president is getting close. The Palestinian Authority is getting closer to Hamas, which is at least on the ground. The fact that the Palestinian Authority is threatening again to go to the ICC doesn't help create any atmosphere of trust between Israel and the Palestinian Authority, which is actually what is very vital at this moment to create some kind of viable situation at the end of this whole conflict.
Yeah, I want to start from where Tal ended. The fact that the Palestinian Authority is threatening to go to the international court will allow Hamas to say we are persecuting Israel in the international instances. And two other points. First, the Egyptian paper from day one until now, it is the same paper.
Right.
The difference is that at the first days when the Egyptian put their paper on the table, they didn't address Hamas directly. Mm-hmm. They spoke to Hamas via the Palestinian Authority, and this time they invited Hamas officially. They didn't want to do, but they were obliged because they saw on the ground that there is a strategic draw. According to the Egyptians, they invited Hamas and they invited the Islamic Jihad, and Hamas sought for legitimacy from the first moment of this round. So this allowed Hamas to go back. And the second, speaking, Hamas is still a political movement. It is true that it is first and above all a military movement, but it is also a political movement. And yesterday, when the political leadership of Hamas went out and saw the massive destructions, they saw also the fights inside the refugee concentrations in the Gaza Strip, thousands of, more than 200,000 in 80 schools of the UNRWA.
Displaced.
Interfights between families who were there. Second, a phenomenon which is amazing, a Palestinian who got his house demolished and wanted to rent a temporary house, found the prices twice or three times higher than it was before this round of confrontation. So the laws of the market played here even, and this is also part of Hamas calculations. Hamas need to take all this into consideration. The Palestinian population will not be ready to go back to the refugee concentrations, and this will oblige Hamas to present a very flexible situation in the Cairo, because we understand that they will not have any tangible achievement to get back. They will have some psychological maybe achievement to raise, but not something tangible. This is why even if we know that the second round will be coming somewhere, I don't think that it will be in the coming days or weeks.
But by inviting the Gaza delegation to Cairo, have the Egyptians indirectly perhaps lowered the status of Mahmoud Abbas?
No, not at all. The Egyptians made it very clear.
Because they didn't invite them directly from the beginning, trying perhaps to speak directly to Abbas and thus avoid speaking directly to Hamas.
The position of the PLO, the position of the Palestinian Authority, obliged the Egyptians to deal also with the Gazans, to deal also with the Hamas and with the Islamic Jihad. We are saying that Egypt represents the position of the hardliners inside the Israeli government, and the Palestinian Authority is representing the hardliners in the Hamas delegations. And ironically, from my understanding, speaking to Palestinians and Egyptians, the Israeli position is even more flexible towards some measures of diminishing or reducing the suffering of the Palestinians in Gaza than the Egyptians. And this is...
Yesterday, the IDF chief of staff gave a statement speaking about how important it is to rebuild Gaza, the role of Israel in reconstructing Gaza. But Israel, also Netanyahu, is in a limbo, we might say, because he has been announcing and stating that any reconstruction of Gaza has to be linked to disarmament of Gaza, and that is much more complicated to implement,
right.
And that also demands a much more longer negotiation than one that you can achieve in 3 or 5 days in Cairo.
It certainly can't be achieved in the first round of negotiations, but I think it's also important to understand the complexity of that equation. I don't see it as meaning the disarmament in Hamas in terms of who Egyptian troops going from town to town and collecting missiles and launchers and production means. I don't think that's what we need to understand from that equation. I think it has to do much more with verification and inspection in the border passages. That can be achieved. It's also complicated.
Containing Hamas.
And it's tangible, and I think it actually would serve as a measure of containing Hamas this time around, because we actually do have Egyptian cooperation at this time. I say at this time because we always have to remember that Egypt, I don't think, is as stable as we'd like to think. A couple of years ago it was somebody else. In another 2 years, we still don't know. I'm not sure that scene has completely settled. But I want to go also back to the issue of Israeli policy and the statements of the Prime Minister, whatever. From a policy planning standpoint, it has to be declared that way. And I think it's authentic in the sense that Israel will not be able to sit and refuse response if Hamas continues hostilities at a certain level of intensity. So in those terms, the flexibility that is maintained by the IDF and by the cabinet is important, and it might still be put into use. And so I don't think those are in any sense empty statements, and I think it doesn't contradict anything else that's been said. It's absolutely what you need to do at a time like this.
And it probably takes also into account public opinion, which I want to get a touch upon. First, I just want to go quickly to Michal Divon, our I-24 News correspondent. You're on the Israeli-Gaza border this morning. What's the latest from there?
Morning, Yael. Very quiet here on the Israel-Gaza border. I can't remember a day like this these past 3 weeks. It seems that civilian life is really wanting to return to its routine, and today on the streets there was definitely more traffic than usual. 29 days of Operation Protective Edge. It seems the focus is definitely moving to the diplomatic sphere. We'll see what comes about from the Cairo talks. Silence, a very nice silence we're hearing here on the Gaza border. Only 2 days ago, this place was one of the highest hit mortar shell locations, very close to the border, where alarms aren't heard, but only the red code sounds. Not many people have returned yet. I think citizens are still weary, especially from the Gaza envelope. However, we are expecting families and children to be returning in the next few days. Meanwhile, today still the Home Front Command and many of the local communities are still telling people to conduct their daily routines very close to shelters, especially now that it's summertime and camps are still ongoing. But it's a very nice morning here, not hearing any of the blasts that we were used to. And now we're trying to get accustomed to a new sort of reality as the focus goes to the diplomatic front.
Michal Divon there on the Gaza border. Thank you for joining us this morning. So Tal, taking off where Halit left off, obviously Netanyahu's rhetoric and his statements are not empty, but he's also, of course, taking into account not only military and political consideration, but also public opinion.
Well, Netanyahu, I think in that respect, was very smart when from the beginning, the goals he set for the operation were very modest. It was returning the calm and restoring the calm to Israeli citizens, targeting the tunnel infrastructure, which has been done successfully, and the disarmament demand was only a bit later, and it wasn't defined as a goal of the operation, but as a goal of the long-term strategic goal. But Netanyahu is definitely going to be in a political limbo, as we mentioned yesterday. Naftali Bennett, Avigdor Lieberman, inside the Likud party, people are just waiting to attack him for not taking a tough enough hand. And he will be, the assumption is he could be paying a price amongst his right-wing political base. But we also might remember that if we're talking about the next elections, whenever they come, but the next elections were supposed to be, or at least were expected to be, on the social economical issue. And now, after this operation, the agenda is back to being a security agenda, a diplomatic agenda.
Something that Netanyahu is very well versed in.
He's very well versed in, and he doesn't really have an alternative inside the Israeli. There's not a real Israeli leader that can compete with him on this issue and present such a strong face. So he is gaining strength, but he's gaining strength probably not in his own camp, but in the other camp that it's not clear that at the end will go to vote for him.
Which I think in a way is actually more important, because what Israeli leaders have always tried to do is get the center, target the center. And I think if he is considered the moderate one, then he might have the ability to target the center. His main rival, I think, in his own mind was Yair Lapid, and Yair Lapid in this war kind of disappeared. However, I don't think the Israeli public sees in general, not just the right wing, this particular operation as an achievement on the part of Netanyahu, especially the part where there was a ceasefire accepted with known 30-some tunnels at the border. I think the Israeli public is going to want someone to answer for that.
There's also the question of diplomatic and what political initiative is Netanyahu taking. The political center, it's true, expects to have some kind of long-term strategy, and this is something that Netanyahu has been failing to do in the past few years, and especially regarding this operation, you're hearing more and more, you're only thinking about the military goals. Nobody's really having any discussion about how Israel really wants the relationship with the Gaza Strip to be. Who does it want to be controlled there? You can see a zigzag. Sometimes some ministers are talking about now we're returning to the same situation in which Gaza Hamas is still in control of Gaza, and we're in a quiet for quiet equation, and not strengthening Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas really in a significant way, and really leading to some kind of different outlook to the whole region and to this specific conflict.
We're talking here about short-term and long-term. In the short-term, Hamas is seen to have this strategic draw. In the long-term, I'm not sure that the Palestinian population will be convinced that this was the situation, and this is the same problem for Prime Minister Netanyahu. He lead said that there should be established a system of inspection. We underestimate what the Egyptians have done in the last 15, 16 months since July 2013. The Egyptians destroyed more than 1,500 tunnels in the Egyptian Rafah. The Egyptians destroyed the 2-3 first lines in the Egyptian Rafah, demolished hundreds of houses in order to block any chance in Hamas for the future to reactivate this tunnel. This is one thing. The second thing, in the Lebanon war, for the first time, the arms of Hezbollah were put on the table. They were controversial for the first time. Until 2006, they were consensual. The population in Lebanon, besides some rivals of Hezbollah, believed that this arm of a private militia or a sectarian militia is legitimate in the sense that the Lebanese army is weak to face the IDF. And a process started in the Palestinian community, in the Palestinian population. We are starting to hear here and there some journalists raising the arms of Hamas. Now the equation is arms of Hamas versus reconstruction of Gaza, and a very significant process. It is very beginning, but it is an important start. The Palestinian population, for the first time since Hamas in 1987 foundation, would deal with this equation: Hamas arms, Hamas interest versus the interest of the Palestinian people versus the chance of the Gaza Strip to have a normal life for its 1.8 millions. Now the question is, will Hamas, and we heard in the last days that some channels were reopened between Hamas, Hezbollah, Hamas, Iran. What choice will Hamas make? Would it be reintegrated in the rebuilding of the Gaza Strip and reintegrated in the political process? And this attitude of President Abbas to show Hamas that we are adopting even your tough position, it's a way of Abbas to trying to attract exactly.
And the question is, have they been deterred by Israel in the past 29 days? They came in with it, as we talked about, a very weak organization, willing to do mostly anything. Have now, because of this political considerations and because of their need to, on the one hand, rehabilitate the Gaza Strip, are they now deterred from Israel?
I don't think. And when we talk Hamas, we talk Hamas abroad and Hamas Gaza. And this is, in my opinion, a very simple and not scientific division of Hamas. Within Hamas Gaza, there are trends and streams. Within the Hamas abroad, there are trends and streams. And the same thing for the military wing. We don't know, but the military wing of Hamas was divided regarding the Syrian crisis. Part of the military wing in Hamas accepted to participate at the side of the rebels in building the whole famous tunnels of the Syrian rebels, and other part kept its loyalty to Iran and to Iran financing. So when we talk about Hamas, we cannot say that we are talking about a homogeneous organization. It is too much suffering from streams and trends than we can imagine. It's not abroad and Gaza, because in Gaza you can see people that share the same vision of some representatives who live abroad, and the same thing for the military wing. This is why we cannot expect what would be the attitude of Hamas. The only thing that can bring Hamas together is something that they can show to the population, that the blockade was put on the table for the first time, negotiated, the reopening, maybe partial or I don't know, complete, of the passages, which I don't see happening very soon, and some measures that the Palestinian population will see having an impact over their daily life.
Halit, on the question of deterrence from the Israeli side, that wasn't a clear-cut goal perhaps from the beginning, but it did evolve later in the operation to be a goal. Is there Israeli deterrence vis-a-vis Hamas?
First of all, it's always a goal. Israeli deterrence on all fronts is always a goal. It's an important goal. We saw in the Second Lebanese War when we found ourselves at the end of it, and a lot of people looked at it as something very difficult with a lot of issues and perhaps failures and whatnot, and ended up being an important strategic step in terms of classical deterrence. And I think it remains to be seen if that happened with Hamas. It's very hard to quantify, exactly for the reason that Ali enumerated. But at the end, from an Israeli perspective, while it's useful to sit there and analyze Hamas, it's also ultimately going to be measured in deeds. And so we have to see what comes along now with the deeds in the Gaza Strip. The political process that Ali had mentioned, that's starting with the Palestinian people, certainly it is the wish, I think, of everybody in Israel to see something better, both from an Israeli perspective and from a Palestinian perspective. There's by no means has life in the Gaza Strip been worthy of the Palestinian people over the last 7 years of Hamas rule. But
that's also going to require concessions on the Israeli part, of course.
Sure, I think it's going. I don't even know if I would call them concessions. It would require a modification of Israeli policy with regard to blockade. Let's not pretend like we hadn't discussed it beforehand or that it wasn't an issue on the table beforehand. The problem now is dealing with a blockade as an achievement to Hamas as a result of war, rather than using 5 years of relative quiet in the West Bank and somehow linking the release of a blockade to an achievement for Abu Mazen that is awarded to the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. But I mean, that's water under the bridge. The question now is, how do we reach it? And again, I think on the Egyptian issue, nobody underestimates their resolve at this time vis-a-vis Hamas, what they had been doing on their part. I think that's what inspections would hinge on, is the cooperation of Egypt on that issue.
Halit and Ali, thank you for joining us. Tal, you'll be staying with us for the next part of this special edition. Thank you for being here. We have a short break, and we'll be back with more from the I-24 News Morning Edition special broadcast this morning. We'll be right back. Welcome back to I-24 News Morning Edition. We're in a special broadcast this morning. Still with me is Tal Shalev, I-24 News diplomatic correspondent. Tal, thank you for staying with us. Amir Oren, our senior defense correspondent, thank you for joining us. And Itzhak Levanon, the former Israeli ambassador to Egypt. Ambassador, thank you for being with us.
Good morning.
Tal, I do want to start where we left off, of course, and we started talking, of course, of the Israeli and Hamas interest. But these are interests that are also guided by the international community which has been quite shaky throughout the 29 days. And now it's pretty unclear who's pushing the strings, besides the Egyptians, of course, and we'll get to that. Who else is behind the scenes?
Well, first of all, Israeli officials probably won't admit it on the record, but the fact is that in the international arena, there has been, I think, in my point of view, a big loss for Israel following this operation, as there is after every military operation Israel has conducted in Gaza in the past few years. There is a diplomatic fallout. The first one we've been seeing, it was the Latin America. It was very evident in Latin America. In the past few days, we're getting a trend from Europe that European countries, more and more European countries, are unhappy with the grave humanitarian situation.
Cutting off sales and so
cutting
forth.
off sales. To just now, the the British Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg says that the IDF operation crossed the line, and he too supports suspending military contracts with Israel. This is a trend that is going around in Europe, and the other achievement might be the wedge that was created between Israel and Washington. Israeli officials have been trying to tame down the tone, but in any case, yesterday I heard an Israeli official briefing me that it's better that Kerry was removed from the picture, and that was very successful.
Why?
Because in the end, the Hamas understood it couldn't use Turkey and Qatar to come to the table, and it had to abide to the Egyptian mediation. That has a logic, but in any case, the communications between Israel and the U.S. are not much better. Yesterday, we talked about the phone call that was disconnected between Netanyahu, cut off between Netanyahu and Kerry. That continues to occupy the American media. Yesterday, the State Department spokeswoman had to address it again, try to bring down the tones. But in any case, let's see what Kerry himself had to say regarding the ceasefire efforts at this moment.
Let's take a look.
But we fully support Israel's right to defend itself, and the fact that it was under attack by rockets, by tunnels, and it had to take action against Hamas. Hamas has behaved in the most unbelievably shocking manner of engaging in this activity. And yes, there has been horrible collateral damage as a result of that, which is why the United States worked very, very hard with our partners in the region, with Israel, with Egyptians, with the Palestinian Authority, with President Abbas, to try to move towards a ceasefire.
Is it surprising?
Well, it's not surprising, but the United States, but Kerry himself is not in the picture right now. He's not even close to getting to the picture. I'm not sure when he'll arrive back in the region. He sent his one of his assistants to overlook the Cairo negotiations, and the tension is still there, and it's Kerry, there is maybe wisdom and justification for the criticism that was directed from the Israeli point of view to Kerry, but in the end, the communications, we've been talking about it all the time. Every day there's a leak regarding the Israeli-American relationship, and there's something with the communications that's not working. It's the line was cut off, and let's see what yesterday there was the former Israeli ambassador to the U.S., Michael Oren, also had some communication problems with the American media. If we can get a look at that.
It's getting repetitive. Let's take a look at that. We're going to get that right in a second. Amir?
You remember that 25 years ago or so, when Jim Baker was Secretary of State, he publicly gave the phone number, what is it, 202-456-1414. So is it better to publicly state where to call or to have a call cut off in the middle? But it's really unfortunate that Israel so short-sightedly looks at what is happening in Cairo, and which could break down, if not today, day after tomorrow, because once the 72 hours expire, if there is no breakthrough, we may very well be back to rockets and air attacks.
Let's just take a quick look at Michael Oren.
And I just have to ask you very briefly, in 10 seconds, were you aware of any eavesdropping of John Kerry by Israeli intelligence?
Andrew, I cannot hear you. I'm sorry.
Michael Oren, can you still hear us in Tel Aviv?
I'm in Tel Aviv. I can't hear you, though. I'm sorry.
Very convenient.
Well, if the subject is eavesdropping, you can't hear, obviously, because you have something in your ear. Which,
and you're listening to someone else. Ambassador...
Look, there is a notion called, diplomatic illness. I mean...
And it's ailing who? Who's
whenever you don't want to do anything, there is this terminology speaking about diplomatic illness. You cannot reachable, you are not breathing, you are weak, you are, this is diplomatic.
Something that's taught in the foreign ministry.
Concerning this issue, I really don't share, let's say that the conclusion that I have heard here. Look, we still have a very strong relationship with the United States, definitely. I don't think that because of the situation now, everything has deteriorated. I don't see really that in the international community, although we have seen it, in the Security Council, the Jordanian, presented a motion which was retrieved by the Jordanians, and probably Algeria will come with something much more extreme. But we don't see yet. I'm telling yet, I don't see that the whole international community is against Israel at this stage, because everybody would like to give the chance to talks in Cairo.
But still, as a facilitator, isn't it surprising at least that the United States is not taking a more active
According
part?
to my information, and I spoke this last night in length with one of the Egyptian officials who is involved. America is much involved, in this issue.
And just not putting it on the front pages.
It's not put in the front pages, but they are in touch with Kerry, and Kerry is giving, suggestions, and probably they will send somebody additionally to the Israeli delegation who will come to Cairo. I think that the United States and Kerry today have consciously decided to leave the Qatari and the Turkey channel because it's irrelevant. Israel doesn't accept it.
Meaning they made a mistake by trying to engage them in the first place?
In my mind, yes. In my mind, yes, because they heard the Egyptians, and this is not the first time that they are hurting the Egyptians. They're hurting the Egyptians also on the bilateral issue. See what happened, with the spokesperson of the State Department, speaking, and now Kerry and the others, they have to rectify what she said. So, yes, they heard the Egyptians, and I heard it from the Egyptians themselves.
Meaning, can we conclude that the Americans perhaps are taking into account that they've hurt the Egyptians in the past, and they're now letting them take the lead? Plus, of course, the shaky relationship with Israel?
The lead today, this morning, the 6th of August in the morning, is in the hands of the Egyptians. This is the lead. I don't know what will happen in tomorrow, the day after, when the Americans will get involved more and more. But definitely, after the Americans have tried with Qatar and Turkey, and they failed completely. It was a total fiasco. So they had no other choice than to go back to the Egyptians and to give the chance to the Egyptians. So far, it's holding. So far, it's going well.
I just want to correct the relationship is shaky on the outside, but yesterday President Obama did sign the additional Iron Dome assistance. There is a good constant contact between Israeli officials and American officials, but just to note, yesterday the president signed a $225 billion assistance. We did not get an announcement of an Israeli prime minister phoning him to thank him for this assistance.
This is the Israeli sensitivity, really. I mean,
no, but we're in a time of crisis. This could be expected. This could be something that could bring some good vibes into the relationship. We have to remember, in the end, Israel is the one that will be needing the United States in the upcoming days and months and weeks in the international community to block all kinds of international initiatives that will come up against Israel, to block
legally, you're speaking.
Yeah, not only legally, also in the UN. Israel needs the US, and it would help if Israel maybe would not cut off the phones with Kerry and return the calls.
But Netanyahu did say that the U.S. assistance was terrific just a day or so earlier.
We can also start analyzing why he used terrific.
Yes, but regarding the visibility of American involvement, one must remember that ever since the Yom Kippur War of 1973, when the relationship between Washington and Cairo was back to normal, the U.S. is the providence in the Arab-Israeli conflict, meaning that it is ever present without being always visible. It is behind the scenes. All the major players need its assistance. So even though it doesn't want another public slap in the face, as the U.S. has gotten all over the world recently, it is there.
In fact, we're not talking about personal feelings, between Israel and the United States. There are interests. And the mutual interests are stronger than anything else. This is the fact on the ground. So you can have ups and downs in terms of the terminology, behavior, the way that you say things or you don't say things, but this will not harm the basis, let's say the basis of the relationship and the interest that we have between Israel and the United States.
But you are too much the policy planner and diplomat. And in the age of television, as we are now, the human face on nations and interests are the leaders. And if one sees that Netanyahu and Kerry and Obama are not on the best of terms, that means that in the public opinion in the countries, it looks bad.
We just heard here that the phone call between Benjamin Netanyahu and Kerry was cut off and not resumed, etc. And suddenly we saw and we hear Kerry, what did he say? He said that we support Israel and we say that we are in favor of Israel, we are behind Israel, etc. So you have to take into account the real statement by the officials, by the leaders, and not, unfortunately, we are now in the room studio here, and not the press or the media who are reporting, they are reporting whatever they have. So I think that we have to take into account the statement coming from the leaders.
I'm referring to another angle. Of course, it's a cycle. The media reports and reflects. Then there are public opinion polls, which actually are based on what people take from the media. And then the media reports that the public opinion poll and so on and so forth.
This is the power of the media.
But when you look at from your experience with the Egyptians, now Israel is going to, with regard, yes, probably most likely Israel understands its strategic ally in the United States, and even if the personal relationship is not as good as it seems, or as we would have wanted to be, is Israel's relationship now with Egypt strong enough for Egypt to be the leader in this round of negotiations?
Yes, apparently it looks like, we have...
Because one can say that's also a shaky relationship. Now, Egypt itself hasn't been a stable state for the past few years.
Look, we're not talking about the domestic issues in Egypt. We are not intervening. This is not our business. Mm-hmm. Egypt is our, partner for peace, and we support, this relationship and the peace treaty between us and Egypt. So we are not there at all. Secondly, Egypt has a role now to play. This morning, when the Israeli delegation will come, and probably it will be in the early afternoon, probably, the real discussions, will start in Cairo. Because the Israeli delegation is coming with the demands, requests, points of discussions, or term of reference, call it whatever you want. And here Egypt has to play the role, because we're not talking directly with the Palestinian delegation. Although it is a delegation headed by the Palestinian Authority, right. But still. So Egypt has a role as a bridge maker between the two sides. The point which is important is, and this is what I detected last night, I was not aware of that, is that Egypt itself has its own positions on the issue. So
serving its own interests, meaning not
only concerning Rafah.
Right.
But I think that Egypt, look, this is the first detection, late last night when I talked to this official, that suddenly Egypt would like also to explain to the Israelis, to explain to the Palestinians, and more specifically Hamas, that look, you cannot ask whatever you want. You have to be reasonable. You have to be aware that things, you can reach them, others you cannot. This is to the detriment of the Israeli position. I'm not talking about Hamas. Hamas has, a maximalistic, demands. But when Israel is coming to Egypt and talking about the equation, reconstruction, rehabilitation of Gaza versus demilitarization, suddenly the Egyptians might stand up and say, wait a minute, sir, this is not realistic. Maybe we will try to have something less than that.
Meaning they want to be a regional leader, or they have their own interests that are going to serve their own national interests?
Egypt, I think, when they enter these discussions, after presenting the peace, the ceasefire, and everybody accepted, and everybody is coming to Egypt, Egypt has an interest to succeed in this. Egypt is not willing to fail in these negotiations because it will harm the image of Egypt and the prestige of Egypt. So Egypt will push in order to reduce the demands of both sides in order to have a common denominator and to reach something.
But reducing the demands of both sides means that both sides will have less achievements to present to their own public if it's Hamas.
This is the essence of any negotiation.
No, but it might not be sustainable. So if we're back to November 2012 understandings and we're back to quiet will be answered by quiet and some lifting of the blockade.
From my own experience, at the United Nations, there's nothing you can stand, the words that you can create. You have a lot of words that you can find out a formula which can satisfy both.
It's very interesting that Egypt is now inserting its own positions, what you just recounted. Does that also mean that Egypt, which has 18 million mouths to feed, doesn't necessarily think that helping 1.8 million Palestinians should have priority over the reconstruction of its own economy, and that Egypt would also like to get something tangible from this in addition to prestige and to foreign policy. Perhaps it too wants to have some assistance.
The problem in Egypt domestically has nothing to do with 1 million Palestinians in Gaza. In the eyes of the Egyptians, I'm talking in the eyes of the Egyptians.
Of the leadership.
Of the leadership.
Because,
look, Egypt is the leadership. It's Abdel Fattah al-Sisi.
Right.
It's not even, the foreign minister, my dear friend Sameh Shukri, who is traveling, to Tunis and Libya, etc. But this is Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and the head of the security, Mohammed Touhami. Those are, the main actors in this regard. Egypt would like to ease the situation to the Palestinians in Gaza, not at the expense of Egypt money or help or aid or anything else. They will seek it elsewhere. I don't think that Egypt will object that Qatar will inject money in order to reconstruct, let's say,
but
Gaza.
Is Egypt competing with Gaza for reconstruction aid?
No. In my opinion, what I have read, what I spoke, what I see, I don't think, but they would like really, this is the objective of Egypt, to ease the situation of the general population. I think that I said it, here a month ago, that Egypt make the distinction between the general public, which Egypt is committed. It is committed traditionally to that public to help him, what I call the Palestinian cause, including the two-state solution, and the other side, which is Hamas. And I think that the behavior of Egypt in this month, including the latest negotiations, it is very clear that Egypt is not keen to discuss directly with Hamas. They are not talking directly with Hamas. They put a condition that the head of the delegation will be the Palestinian Authority. They don't care that inside there will be people of Hamas because there is the coalition that Abu Mazen say. And when it comes to personalities, Haniyeh or Ismail or Khalid Mashhad, they say stop. They are not permitted to enter. This is the strong position of Egypt towards Hamas.
Right.
I call it assertive position.
And then the begging question would be, is how strong is Sisi for the long term? Looking at Egypt's short history in the past few years, one would say, the revolutions that came and gone and the leadership that has changed, Egypt may not be the most stable partner, maybe now at this time, yes. But
look, if you move inland, I think that Egypt, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and the Muslim Brotherhood, they have an existential fight. Because each one would like, to see the other,
right.
Disappearing
politically. The Muslim
politically.
Brotherhood still exists. It's still something that's
yeah,
maybe
but they are
underground.
they are completely under control. They are in prisons. They don't have, the capability. I think that they were declared terrorist organizations. And I think that Sisi now is building Egypt slowly. See what happened the day before yesterday. We were fighting in Gaza, and he's opening a parallel Suez Canal, in Sinai. So he is doing things, and he is perceived yet as the one who is going to save Egypt from the catastrophe of the Muslim Brotherhood. So I don't think that at this stage Sisi has any danger. But in politics, it's like in politics.
But the 2 years between 2011 and 2013 were an aberration in Egyptian history.
Right.
Because ever since 1952...
But also in Arab history. It's not only Egypt. And that's
the Free Officers,
right.
movement, the revolution, military officers who became presidents ruled Egypt quite firmly. And when Mubarak got too old and infirm, the revolution took place. But now under Sisi, it's back to Nasser and Sadat and Mubarak.
The only time will tell. Tal, of course, the Israeli delegation is being made up of Netanyahu's also close associates and also the experts, quote unquote, on negotiations. Who's on the team?
Well, we're talking about Netanyahu's special envoy Yitzhak Molcho and the head of the political directorate in the Defense Ministry Amos Gilad and the head of Shin Bet Security Services Yoam Cohen, and there are also some IDF officials, if I'm not mistaken. But probably Ambassador Lebanon will know better to elaborate on that. But yes, these are the people that have been holding the contacts with Egypt in the past few years. They are considered to be the experts, and they have been in constant contact with their Egyptian counterparts, even while being here in Israel, Tel Aviv, or Jerusalem in the past few weeks.
Do you have any other more information?
Look, there is a reason why to send this trio. But I will put it in a different set of priority. This is first the head of the Shin Bet. Because, basically this is the issue of the Hamas, and the Shin Bet is, involved in Gaza and the West Bank, etc. So it's logical that he will be the one who knows, let's say, who has the most information.
And Touhami's counterpart. he's along with Mossad, the counterpart of General Tuhami.
I don't think that the Mossad is involved in that, but never mind. You see, the second one is Molcho because he is the representative of Bibi Netanyahu, and whenever Mr. Molcho, my dear friend and personal friend, will send to Bibi Netanyahu will listen, and he will give instructions, back to the delegation, which is the head of the Amos Gilad, because he is from the army. Definitely, there are aspects of the army. He was in touch, with most of the Egyptian. Basically, during the time of Mubarak, less during the time of Morsi, and even less, now. But he's, together with this, you have some professionals.
How important is the personal relationships between certain parts of the Israeli delegation to
between themselves?
No, that we can.
This is the most important issue.
That could be a whole new other show about that.
Look, Molcho is a nice guy. He is amenable. He is adjustable. He speaks with everybody. He has only one thing in his mind. How to satisfy his boss, Bibi Netanyahu.
He's a lawyer. He has a client.
Yeah. He is a lawyer.
But also, we've been speaking throughout the turnover in Egypt about the security services in Egypt and Israel working together well throughout. Is this now going to be taking, a center stage?
Not in the case of Gaza. You see, in the case of Egypt and Israel, we have two aspects. The first aspect is Sinai.
Right, and the border. Right.
Beit el-Maqdis, and here we have a full cooperation because there is a danger to both sides from Beit el-Maqdis terrorist organization. The second aspect is, this is what Egypt did, in the last year and a half, and this has a certain repercussion on Gaza and even on the talks, is to stop the tunnels between Sinai and Gaza. Egypt did an excellent job by destroying 1,800 or 1,900. Even, during the campaign, during the operation, they destroyed 15. In this regard, I think that Egypt will continue. By the way, and parenthesis, in the eyes of the Egyptians, that this is what I heard from the official, is that they already gave their share, in the discussions in weakening Hamas, because we are stopping the tunnel. So what you are asking from us more than that. We are doing this, we will continue to do it. So Egypt will continue to stop this in order that Hamas will not be able to have smuggled weapons or other things. So this is the role of Egypt, which is positive.
It's ironic that the tunnel issue has become so central in the U.S., in the Egyptian-Israeli Palestinian triangle, because right after the peace treaty with Egypt was signed, critics of this treaty in Israel warned that the Egyptians are going to dig tunnels under the Suez Canal and will be able to reinforce Sinai in contravention of the peace treaty. And lo and behold, the tunnels are now making Egypt and Israel get closer rather than farther.
Look, there is another story which is old, like 3.5, 4 years ago, is when the whole issue with the Hamas, etc., and the Egyptians, they build a steel fence deep into the land, like 30 meters,
and an underground border.
Yeah, and the Egyptians believed, that this will stop digging the tunnels from the Palestinian side. It was not
successful.
nevertheless. Amir?
I take objection to your earlier remark that only time will tell. Time and commentators in the studio.
Tal, looking, of course, at the timetable, talking about time, we have another one more day of this ceasefire. Then it will, what's the process? Then it will turn into longer negotiations between who?
Well, the Egyptian, first of all, we have to see that at the end of the next 48 hours, there will be any agreement. If not, the Egyptians have already proposed to extend the ceasefire in another 48 hours, and we could be winding into a process of extension, temporary extensions of the ceasefire. But that, of course, depends on the fact that the equation will be quiet, will be answered by quiet. If there isn't any quiet, and I remind that we are seeing also the West Bank warming up, and nothing here in the region is really quiet. I think there's a sense of feeling. We heard before Michal Divon saying that the Gaza envelope residents are not returning to their homes
not
yet.
Immediately.
There is a sense of a conditioned quiet. It's not clear that we're really over it. And the negotiations could be extended. And in the end, if we return to the equation of quiet will be answered by quiet, we could just evolve into this kind of status quo that the Israeli deterrence keeps up for a while until the next round continues, and it depends on what really will the Hamas gain in the end and how much the blockade will be lifted. I do think that if the Hamas does not achieve any big achievement regarding the opening of the Gaza Strip, we could very quickly see the situation deteriorate again.
As a general rule, we have been too optimistic when this crisis began, and then we became too pessimistic as it went on, and we may be too optimistic now.
The ambassador will blame the media, you know.
Saying that it is over.
Look, very quickly, I think that we're in a different phase now, and you have to stop talking about the terrorists who won the war, etc. This is in a new phase now. Secondly, I think that the Egyptians are fully aware that the negotiations, or let's say the indirect talks, etc., is not going to end in 24 hours. They do know this very clearly. So the main focus this morning, when the delegation of the Israelis will come, is to extend the ceasefire unlimited in the eyes of the Egyptians, because they would like to say to both sides, let's have a conducive atmosphere, you know, that we can talk easily. Otherwise, everything will blow up. So this is the main objective of the Egyptians this morning on the 6th of August.
The talks, right. Because this is the Middle East. We
it
have
will take time.
It will take time. And no one's rushing. Ambassador Lebanon, thank you for joining us. Tal and Amir, thank you for being here. We're going to be right back after the next headlines from the I-24 News Desk, and then we'll have another hour of the Morning Edition special broadcast this morning. It's day 30 of Operation Protective Edge, or 30 days since the operation started. We'll be right back. Good morning. Thank you for joining us once again here at I-24 News Morning Edition. This is a special broadcast of the I-24 News Morning Edition. Today marks the 30th day since the start of Operation Protective Edge and the second day of an Egyptian-brokered ceasefire intended to lead to a longer-term ceasefire. It came into force yesterday morning after Hamas fired a barrage of rockets minutes before and then fell quiet. Israeli military leaders maintain they delivered a serious blow to Hamas, including destroying all of its known cross-border tunnels, and have reiterated the IDF is prepared to restart military action if needed. IDF troops withdrew from Gaza, and Israeli and Palestinian delegations are in Cairo for indirect ceasefire talks. With me is Arad Nir, Channel 2 Foreign Affairs Editor. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Amir Oren, you're still here in studio, Senior Defense Arts Correspondent. And Yossi Melman, Intelligence and Security Expert. Yossi, thank you for being with us. Amir, I would like to take off where we ended. The IDF said it's going to reiterate with any kind of response, meaning we can also see not only the ceasefire ended, but another few days of operation.
The IDF is working both short-term and long-term vis-à-vis the tunnel problem. Now, there are no tunnels left in the small
that we know of.
Yes, in the small strip of land between the urban areas of the Gaza Strip and the Israeli border, but the southern command of the IDF is on guard lest they be detected again. So therefore, they have a two-pronged plan. One is defensive, to start installing some detection and barrier system, but they do not want to bank on that, partly because it is very expensive and partly because it's not yet technologically feasible. They also want to be very offensive and with a public posture regarding this offensive mood, and therefore they are warning that if any tunnel is found, even in the process of being dug, they want to take it out preemptively.
Yossi, when watching yesterday's Israeli TV and news editions, one would say that maybe the overarching theme was who won the war. Is this a question that should be asked now, or maybe it shouldn't be asked at all? As we say, you know, this is 29 days of combat that took a very heavy toll both on Israel and the Palestinians. It's not quite sure the military achievements are such that will keep a long-standing ceasefire in effect.
Well, even if we say that the war results should be measured weeks, months, and maybe a year after, it would not help, because the Israeli television and the world media are dealing with this question, who won the war? My answer is no one, or at least anyone who expected the knockout in the ring was mistaken. I think Israel won this war by points, but the real test will be if within a year or at least 6 months from now, there will be peace in the area. Now, regarding the elusive term of deterrence, it depends on the Israeli side more than on the on Hamas side. Because we have been in these circumstances before, if Hamas, and I have no doubt that either Hamas or the Islamic Jihad would put Israel into the test in the coming weeks, they'll fire one mortar shell, maybe one rocket, maybe they'll target an open area, in order not to cause any casualties. But if the Israeli reaction would not be fierce, they would understand that they can continue with this kind of campaign, which we have witnessed in the past. Therefore, the test is now in the coming weeks to see what would be the Israeli reaction, not only to the tunnels, if they are detected, as Amir said, but also if there is just, a single bullet fired from Gaza. Because in previous campaigns, and in the wars in Lebanon, the Israeli leaders were trumpeting, we would be forcefully retaliating if even a single bullet is fired, and they did nothing.
Because what is being spoken about now in Cairo is basically, and this is the criticism towards Hamas, perhaps not only from its own people but also from the world, is basically the same proposal that was on the table before ground troops were put in.
Well, maybe, yes. Well, that's why Hamas, in that sense, surrendered. They unconditionally surrendered. They rejected offers which could have saved human life and less devastation and destruction in Gaza, and they rejected it, and eventually they accepted exactly the same offer, maybe with a slight modification. I personally was surprised yesterday at 6:30 in the morning when the IDF spokesman announced that Israel is pulling out. The general assumption was, at least among experts, that the Israel IDF would stay in Gaza.
It wasn't an assumption. This was the policy that Netanyahu announced when it was unilateral, before they rejoined the talks. Then they didn't even see it as cards to hold.
Well, I agree. So was the Israeli concession to that equation in order to have a ceasefire.
Arad, and of course I can pose the same question on the Israeli side. The Israeli is going to do its own kind of homework and look at within itself the 29 days of war. Yes, we can talk about tunnels, we can talk about maybe deterrence, but at the end of the day it was a very, very heavy toll also on the Israeli side and also on the Palestinian side.
I'm less optimistic than most of my colleagues around this table, and in Israel in general, I think it didn't end yet. We still have some processes to pass in order to proclaim this confrontation over. With regards to the surrender of Hamas, yes, Hamas might have surrendered in a certain regard, but by surrendering, it saved Israel from itself, because Israel could not have withstand the further criticism that would come upon if it would have continued this ruining process of Gaza, this killing of civilians, justified or not. Well, I cannot see any justification. I personally cannot see any justification for killing civilians. Nevertheless, the fact that Israel stopped these bombings saved Israel from itself to start with. Now, regarding the processes that are being undergoing in Cairo now, the gap between the sides is enormous. Netanyahu is talking about the militarization of Gaza. Will Hamas enable this kind of process? I doubt it. Hamas asks for unconditional uplifting of the siege, even this minimum. Will Netanyahu accept this without any return? I doubt it. So the gaps are enormous. Israel tries to give this impression that it's all over. You know, we saw these pictures on this particular screen of all the tanks being pulled out. And I don't know. We still have to be very, very cautious.
We are an overly conscious image age. And if we can't have a victory picture, let us have a happy end picture. And if not a happy end picture, at least an end picture. at the end of the movie, there must be the subtitle, "The End." But this is not a movie, and there are no endings here. Perhaps it's an episode in a series. Perhaps we are now out for a break, and it will resume shortly.
And the question, of course, that will be asked from days to come, also by Israel, also by the Palestinians, but also by the international community, is at what price are we reaching this very
yes, was it worth it? Was it avoidable? Is it going to be resumed? These are all questions which we can all assure you, even the leaders don't have answers to. It's not as if there is one truth to be found if we only had the code to the vaults in Washington, Cairo, and Jerusalem. Nobody knows.
Coming back to this gap I was talking about in Cairo between Israel and Hamas, I must stress that this gap can be bridged not necessarily by military means.
Right.
You remember this old Prussian general scholar whom we brought into the discussion here 3 weeks or 4 weeks ago, this Mr. Clausewitz, von Clausewitz. You know, somebody can come up with a plan, with a diplomatic plan, with diplomacy to try and bridge these gaps. But this is not on the table, at least as far as I know, for this particular time.
I want to bring another journalist into this discussion. Abir Ayoub, you're joining us from Gaza this morning. Thank you for being with us. Good morning. Do we have Abir on the line? Abir?
Yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Can you give us the sense of what's going on now on the streets of Gaza? It's been about 24 hours of quiet since after 29 days of course, of conflict. What is the mood and atmosphere now on the Gaza Street?
Actually, it's a new atmosphere, a new, thing to see after 30 days of people stuck indoors. Yesterday, the streets were crowded with people. The supermarkets were open. Everyone was out. It was different from area to another. In Shijaiya and Beit Lahia, people went to explore what happened to their houses. It was like very shocking views to them. They saw their houses devastated. Even people from other areas went to Shijaiya and to the front lines. I mean, to see like what happened to the city. I asked a couple of people about like how they think, and they said we need to know Gaza again now because it's no longer the way it was before.
And what is the perception towards Hamas now, 29 days after conflict, and you're describing the mass destruction in Gaza that you don't even recognize? Is there any perception within the population there that Hamas is also responsible for the situation?
Actually, no. People know and aware that Israel is 100% responsible for the devastation that happened, the damage, the murder, the thousands being killed and injured. And I would tell you that people here like differentiate between Hamas, the faction, and Hamas, the resistance. And people like are supporting the resistance with all what they have. So I expected what you said, but the case is that people are supporting Hamas because they think that the regional and international community attitude towards Gaza is so disappointing. So, having the home front strong is better than waiting a support from anyone else around the world.
But when you, of course, look at the Cairo talks today, the Palestinian Authority is leading these talks, but Hamas is being represented. What is the public opinion in Gaza want to get out of these talks? And do they see perhaps the Palestinian Authority as a leader that can represent them maybe better than Hamas?
Actually, it's something understood, like the Palestinian Authority is more accepted internationally, and this is understood to people. So it doesn't matter at the end who would negotiate, either Hamas or the PA, as long as the ceasefire agreement would meet the demands of the people here. The demands of the people here are not fantasy. Like they're asking for lifting the siege, which has been slowly killing them for more than 7 years. So I believe that no matter who's, negotiating in Cairo, it's a Palestinian voice at the end of the day. And yeah, it can be, more suitable that the PA is negotiating because it's widely recognized, it's widely accepted. But what matters is the outcomes of the talks.
Abir, it's Arad Nir here. I wonder if the people in Gaza, the civil society in Gaza, is prepared for another round of violence should the talks in Cairo won't bring the expected outcome of uplifting the siege.
God forbid. God forbid, because, no one is ready for another round of violence and attacks. I mean, it's crazy. Like, all the people I met yesterday, they were saying, like, we are shocked that we could stay alive and we are fine. We are walking in the streets again. It's a huge, mental stuff that we would have to deal from now on, because what we witnessed during the 3 days was more than what you can think of, more than what we saw in 2008, even more than 2012. So we are praying it's going to work. But I wasn't tired. Like yesterday, people were saying, like, do you think it's over? Do you think we're going to have, more clashes? But we were trying to dismiss this idea and think, like, no, and inshallah, like, it's going to, bring, like, talks would bring a ceasefire, because no one is ready for a new round of violence. Also, there is no more targets for the IDF to target. I mean, they damaged houses, mosques, schools, streets, full neighborhoods. So I'm not sure, like, if there is a new round of violence, what targets as would the IDF have.
Abir, we have another question from the studio. Amir Oren from Haaretz.
Hi, Abir. How are you?
Hi.
Everybody in the world understands that the Palestinians in Gaza are victims. But do you in Gaza, deep down, understand who victimized you?
Yeah, Israel and the international community victimized me. Why? Because I was born in a conflict zone. I would tell you, I'm 27 years old. I was born in First Intifada. I was witnessing Israeli soldiers walking beside me when I was going to my elementary school before it withdrew troops from Gaza before 2005. Also, in my secondary school, I witnessed Second Intifada. And within less than 5 years, I witnessed 3 wars, and I studied, I went to university when strict siege was imposed on me. I was, trying so hard to afford money so I can study. It was so hard, it wasn't easy. And at the end, no one is blaming Israel. Everyone is blaming the weak side. People are blaming Hamas and resistance instead of blaming Israel for killing thousands of Palestinians in Gaza and slowly killing them. So there is no doubt, it's crystal clear that the occupation victimized me.
So Hamas is not the villains, but the heroes to you and to your friends?
Actually, yes. Yeah.
Will you be willing to accept Mahmoud Abbas as an authority in Gaza?
Mahmoud Abbas what?
Will you be willing to accept him and the Palestinian Authority in Gaza?
He is in the Palestinian Authority already. I mean, it's not like I would accept him or not. Mahmoud Abbas has a different line. He's negotiating with Israel for the rights of Palestinians, which is something totally, opposing what Hamas is doing. Some people here are, supporting negotiations. Some others supporting resistance. And I believe in this political variety. I just believe in it. I just believe we can have it. But Abbas is in the authority already. I believe that a unity government will succeed after the war to take care and to run both the enclaves, Gaza and the West Bank.
Abir Ayoub, a journalist, of course, from Gaza, thank you for joining us this morning. And this is hoping that the ceasefire, of course, will be sticking and their political solution will come out of all of this. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Well, on the assumption, and it is only an assumption, that Abir was free to express her mind under the circumstances in Gaza, there is some cause for despair in what she said, because if the Palestinians in Gaza really believe that the Hamas people who caused the destruction are heroes and not villains, what chance for peace is there? But there is also some cause for hope, because if there is some understanding reached between Israel and Hamas, Hamas, if it enjoys such a popular base, would be able to impose it on the other organizations. And yesterday, we found out from the IDF that the Palestinian Islamic Jihad was actually decimated more than Hamas was.
Right.
So indirectly, it would help both Israel and Hamas if they reach some sort of agreement.
All right.
Well, this conversation showed us the weakness of the Israeli narrative regarding it, not only in Gaza, but the world over.
Right.
This disproportionality, again, which we brought onto this table in very, very early stages of this conflict. And unfortunately, Israel cannot convince not the people of Gaza nor the world over that it is not causing this particular damage that we are seeing, that it is being caused by Hamas and Hamas is responsible. It doesn't work.
Israel cannot convince Hamas anyway.
No, that Hamas is responsible, I mean.
Well, but luckily enough, Abir's line was not cut off in the middle of the broadcast, as it happened with the Finnish reporter reporting from Jaffa.
Well, the Finnish reporter is not a Zionist, she's very, very upset with the ways and means that her report was used here in Israel. And I say
there is a great deal of disillusionment that Gaza and Hamas is not free.
We're going to have to break there. We'll be right back after this short break. Welcome back to I-24 News Morning Edition. We're on a special broadcast this morning. It's been 30 days since the start of Operation Protective Edge, and 1 day, of course, since the start of the 72-hour ceasefire. The Israeli delegation has arrived in Cairo, and we will be updating throughout the day about the talks in Cairo. With me this hour is Lieutenant Colonel in Reserves Avital Leibovich, who's also the director of the AJC Jerusalem. Thank you for joining, Avital. I-24 News correspondent Gabi Tertakovsky, and Channel 10's culture editor Chen Lieberman. Thank you, Chen, for joining us. Avital, I do want to start with you. Of course, we're talking, and we've been talking throughout the entire day, of the victory of Israel versus the victory of Hamas. Is there a victorious leader? And is that something that you can project around the world and take with it when you speak to audiences worldwide?
Well, I don't like to use the term victory. I do think the IDF and Israel, of course, in large, has many achievements here. Mm-hmm. For starters, we have, I think, brought back Hamas maybe a decade back. The number of rockets that were destroyed is a huge rocket, but more than that, the manufacturing capabilities were heavily damaged. In addition, there's deterrence, and this is something, of course, that can only be measured in the future. And look at those 32 tunnels that some were operational already, meant for deadly attacks. I think that at the end of the day, the returning of peace and security and safety to the people of Israel was semi-achieved, and the second part, of course, is the diplomatic one.
But is it conveyed to the public that you speak to, a public that hasn't been under attack here in Israel? Obviously, it's easier to speak to the residents of Sderot and the southern regions, and they understand their fear, even here in the center of Israel. But when you speak to international audiences, they see the pictures coming out of Gaza, they see the numbers, and it's probably just a tad more difficult to explain the situation to them.
Well, I'll give this two parts to my answer. The first one is now we are seeing something very interesting we've never seen before. This is the foreign correspondents leaving Gaza and actually releasing materials they were afraid or concerned of releasing them when they were inside. And those materials, different kinds of footage, actually show the extent that Hamas went to danger the civilians in Gaza. The second thing is, we brought a delegation here, regional directors from the United States, and when they were coming here, they had this vision in their mind that Israel is overwhelmed with rockets from every corner. It's very dangerous. And only when they were here on the ground, they really found out the secret, which is the Israelis' resilience. And this is something that I think as a nation, we have a lot of pride in, because we were strong. The Israeli people are strong. They are coming together, although they're critical. And I think we should not underestimate this capability.
But of course, when you look at the day after, and yesterday you could see on the Israeli media channels, looking at the reports, many of the reports dealt with, are the citizens willing to come back to their communities in the south? Is life going to go on? And so far, the answer is pretty much no. People are still fearful.
But I also saw in those polls that the chief of staff got 83% support from the public, which is the highest support from any other leader that influenced this operation, which actually says everything. At the end of the day, the average Israeli has, in a way, stocks inside the IDF, because he has children there. He is himself doing reserve. His neighbors are. So there's always a very strong connection.
Is there a dissonance between this 83%, or I also saw numbers earlier in the operation, 87% of the public behind the operation, and what the American Jews are feeling at this time? Because, of course, the pictures coming out of Gaza?
On my side, I'm trying to convey the most accurate picture I can. And it's very difficult because the media tends to go with those pictures of the wounded children, which are, by the way, some Israeli, I'm telling you, forward. It's very heartbreaking. It's horrific pictures. But where are the pictures of Hamas militants? I mean, I think the IDF gave numbers as between 700 and 900 militants were killed. Where are the pictures of those? Only children versus IDF. So the improportionality is right there.
I want to also ask you questions under your previous hat as a head of the IDF spokesperson's unit, also in North America, and also the social media and so forth. This operation, if you can compare it to others, has shown maybe a great leap towards technology. Is it something that was helpful, or maybe sometimes also damaging, to be so involved in social media?
Well, I think for the first time, the extent that Palestinians in Gaza and Hamas use the social media is something that we have not witnessed in the past. There were attempts, of course, but the amount of false pictures that was posted online, pictures from Syria, and heartbreaking pictures, but it was from Syria. And unless you expose that in the public, this could be the victorious picture of Hamas.
And when you talk about the backlash, we saw in Operation Cast Lead, most of the international community got involved only after the operation had ended. They saw the pictures, they saw Goldstone and so forth. Is this going to be the case at this time as well?
Well, I do hope not. But I can tell you that if you're looking at the UN, because you brought the UN Council up, Human Council, look at UNRWA. And I think we should ask this question publicly. We're talking about an organization, the biggest UN organization inside Gaza, employs something like 8,000 Palestinians. In 3 schools, caches of rockets were found. By the way, it's responsible for social media. In 2007, I even posted a clip of people firing mortars from an UNRWA boys' school in Bet Hanun. It's online. And then we found a tunnel dug underneath a clinic, a UNRWA clinic, and it takes a few years to dig a tunnel, so nobody saw the tunnel being dug for 2 years or 3 years. This is a serious question that we need to ask, because UNRWA also conveys to the rest of the world some beliefs in the name of impartiality of the UN, and this is something of concern. So if Israel will be under some kind of investigation, which I hope not, I think UNRWA should be just the same.
But the IDF also took different measures this time, as opposed maybe because of what it learned from operations in the past, had legal experts on the ground. These legal experts, what is their job exactly in real time? And of course, most of the job is going to be now.
So there are 2 things the IDF really learned. The first one is to really employ legal advisors. So every target of those 4,600 targets that were picked were actually authorized by the legal advisor, which said this is with accordance to international law. If it wasn't that way, then the target was canceled. The second thing the IDF did, he appointed a general that from day one began to investigate things that took place on the ground. Rather than waiting months and months for investigation, he did it right there. So I think these are 2 major lessons that were learned and implemented.
We're going to get back to that in just a second. I want to start with some headlines from Gabi Tartakovsky. Gabi, what are we starting with?
We're starting with a report from Haaretz. Spain freezes arms exports to Israel over this Gaza operation. We've reported earlier that Britain is set to review its arms deals with Israel.
And we saw a tweet by the Deputy Prime Minister, Nick Clegg, saying that the trade deal needs to be reviewed once again.
Nick Clegg supports it. The chairman of the British committee responsible of reviewing it is also from the Liberal Democrat Party. But Spain has decided already last Thursday a committee involving senior Spanish officials from the Economy Ministry, the Prime Minister's office, have decided to announce the freeze. It will be valid until September. Spanish officials claim this move sends Israel a diplomatic signal. The decision will be reviewed in the next committee until September. Now, you have to see that Spain, this is really a diplomatic signal because there's not a lot of trade between Spain and Israel. In 2013, the weapons sale between the two countries was 5 million euros. It's just 1% of all Spanish security expenses, but still it is a warning sign. And perhaps other nations, perhaps even France, will join the UK and Spain.
The French president also speak out in different rhetoric than he has used before. Vital, is this a trend that will be increasing? This is pretty unprecedented when you talk about Europe and Israeli relations.
Well, you know, when you spoke, I was reminded by the fact that there was a campaign, or at least they tried to have some sort of a BDS campaign about not selling products behind the green lines. And when you check the numbers at the end of the day, the damage is very, very minimal. So I think we have to differentiate between the online social media or general media campaign against Israel and what's going on the ground, because at the end of the day, we have to still wait and see the extent of these implications.
Gabi?
But there is a symbolic meaning. I think that for people overseas, the distinction that we, and perhaps not as much Israelis, do make between the Green Line and the settlements in the West Bank and so forth, for many consumers who are politically aware, they do not differentiate between Tel Aviv and any other commercial area between the West Bank, over the West Bank.
Nor will they look for the little line on the back that says this was manufactured in the West Bank.
So why not boycotting Israel altogether?
I don't think that's the trend. I think there is always, and we saw this also in Cast-led operation, there's always a big gap between the media and the campaigns and the demonstrations outside of usually very young age people and the political level. And you saw at the end of Cast-led operation, there were 6 European leaders at the Prime Minister's residence, all showing support. And also here, who at the end of the day is working with us? Egypt and Abu Mazen.
A gap between maybe the leadership and public opinion.
Right.
Gabi, what else?
Speaking of public opinion and European politics, the Telegraph reports that Baroness Warsi resigns from the government, British government, over Gaza. Saida Warsi was the senior Foreign Office Minister. She announced her resignation from the British government over the policy on Gaza, saying it is morally indefensible. In her letter of resignation, she said the British response to the crisis in Gaza will have a long-term impact on our reputation internationally and domestically. Now, Warsi was Britain's first female Muslim cabinet member, but critics say that she resigned over internal politics within the British cabinet. Prime Minister
Used it as a trigger.
Used it as a trigger, as an excuse, because she was not satisfied with the recent cabinet shuffle Prime Minister Cameron has made, sacking several key ministers she was close to. But this still another public act which sends a strong message, and Britain is divided over this operation in terms that I don't recall from previous operations.
Even the head of the Labour Party, Miliband, had criticism for Cameron for not speaking up enough, and also we spoke about that yesterday. That also has political baggage put to it. Maybe it's not only his ideology, he's also looking to gain votes in the next round of elections.
Yes, I think British foreign policy concerning Israel in particular will be a hot topic in Britain for many months to come.
What else do you have?
The Jerusalem Post reports that Jordanian Prime Minister refuses to withdraw its ambassador in Israel. That's perhaps the best news I can offer at this morning. Prime Minister Abdallah Ansur chaired a cabinet session held on Sunday to discuss the situation in Gaza Strip. He said that the ambassador Walid Obidant would stay in Israel so he could continue to serve the Palestinians in the West Bank and the Israeli Arabs and the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. Some of them, of course, have a Jordanian citizenship as well. But with that in mind, he still condemned the killings in Gaza and said he will work to solve and aid as much as they can. Mm-hmm. And we've seen reports that Jordan is the only other country authorized by Israel to provide medical aid to Gaza's casualties. So the ambassador stays in to see over that operation as well.
Right, and they're also, of course, involved in the talks in Cairo as well. And obviously, I don't think they're going to want to exit from those very soon at all. They're also interested in the region.
Yes, they are concerned as well. Other voice of concern is for Turkish energy minister. Hurriyet Daily News says that Turkey rules out energy alliance with Israel until Gaza peace. Now, there was a natural gas project between Turkey and Israel in the works, but now the Minister of Energy, Taner Yildiz, said if we build a natural gas pipeline from Israel or the Eastern Mediterranean under these circumstances, i.e. the Gaza conflict, I quote, the blood of innocent infants and mothers, not natural gas, would flow through it. Now, these are very harsh words. Indeed. He made these comments while holding a press conference with the energy ministry from Malta. And he continued on saying, the issue can be discussed only after a permanent ceasefire and an end to the cruelty in Palestine. Now, Israel discovered in 2010 a large resource of gas offshore, and this is the largest offshore gas discovery ever, basically. And Israel is discussing any means to channel through the gas pipelines, and Turkey is an important alliance, right, diplomatically and also economically.
Well, diplomatically, they haven't been doing so well. In the past operation, Erdogan has said similar comments, even maybe worse. We can analyze his rhetoric.
He definitely takes on Erdogan's lead, definitely.
They're competing. Anything else?
Yes, back to Israeli politics. Energy reports that the Israeli Ministry of Interior demands to revoke a terrorist's citizenship. The Israeli Minister of Interior, Gideon Sa'ar, issued a request to the Israeli Attorney General to revoke Muhammad Mafarji's citizenship. Now, Mafarji was responsible for the terror attack in 2012. Just the last few days of the last operation, Pillar of Defense, a bus attack in central Tel Aviv, 28 were injured. Muhammad is now serving 25 years in prison, in Israeli prison. He's an Israeli citizen, mm-hmm, but he was born in the West Bank, and his Israeli citizenship was granted under family reunification clause, and now it's being challenged to see if his citizenship can be revoked. Interestingly enough, the U.S. does not revoke citizenship of terrorists. There are several Al-Qaeda members who were born in the U.S. and still hold on to their American citizenship.
And where are they residing? We don't know.
well, now they're either overseas or in American prisons, but the U.S. Supreme Court saw that revoking the citizenship will be a violation of the 14th Amendment, which grants American neutralization to all its indigenous population.
And you have one last headline?
One last thing. Ynet reports Google removes Gaza war games. This is unfortunately a very peculiar trend. Some people view it as a game, literally. There was this game called Bomb Gaza, which was removed from Google Play Store. You basically play an Israeli pilot.
I understand the objective.
Yes, the objective is to kill as many terrorists as possible and avoid any civilian casualties. This game was downloaded 1,000 times. It got less than 10 likes on Facebook, but still caused a commotion.
Horrible.
Horrible. Yeah. People reported it as being offensive. There's also a Gaza Assault Code Red game, also removed, but this game Code Red is set apart by the fact that there are no civilians in this game, only terrorists. And interestingly enough, there's also an additional game which has not yet been removed. It's called
Not yet been removed, okay.
Not yet been removed. Whack the Hamas. It's based on the Whack the Mole classic game. You basically...
That's very low-tech.
Very low tech. You play against Hamas militants who pop up out of tunnels, and you have to whack them like you whack the mole in the classic game.
Right.
That game is still available if you want to challenge yourself and see.
We have some video of these games. Let's take a quick look. And do we know that it's who made these games? Where it came from?
I'm
afraid to ask.
Whack the Hamas, from what I have seen, I think it's based in some Arab nation, but the Bomb Gaza and other games are either from Israel or any other Western nation. But Whack the Hamas, obviously, Hamas has its share of enemies in the Arab world as well, and I think I could have done better in playing Whack the Hamas had I known proper Arabic.
There you go.
I have two more comments about social media games.
Please, now that you...
First one is, since it's for my expertise, first one is, in the IDF, I don't know if you know this, but in the IDF we developed a game. It's called IDF Ranks. It's on the blog of the IDF, and the idea is very simple. The more you share content that the IDF posts, the higher you go in ranks without killing anybody, without attacking Hamas. The second thing is, I'll say this under the hat of a parent. You know, it seems normal to us here, but, you know, I have 3 kids, and all of them downloaded the Red Alert app, even my 8-year-old, on their smartphones. And this is something...
Which is surreal in itself.
You know, they did it after the first alarm. I mean, I didn't force them. I didn't tell them to do it, but they did it after the first alarm by themselves. It gave them sort of a feeling of protectiveness or something of that sort. And we're laughing about the whole thing, but it is really something that kids should not download. You know, the kids should be downloading games and not Red Alert apps, and this is the situation that we're still in, unfortunately.
Unfortunately. Gabi, thank you. Chen, you're here also not only as a culture correspondent, but also to talk about the aftermath of this operation. We've spoken about it militarily, politically, diplomatically, but culturally, there's been quite an impact on the culture scene in Israel and also within the Israeli fabric, the population.
Right, and it brings out the question, what is the position where Israeli artists who are opinionated, where can they find themselves in such times? It's not easy to be an opinionated Israeli artist ever,
right?
But it's even harder during wartime.
Because we saw, you know, government ministers and so forth, everyone really went to one side. There was some government ministers perhaps that outspoke even, went even further right, but on the left side, everyone really went with Netanyahu.
Exactly, and Israeli artists who express an opinion that was just not mainstream, not extremist, just not mainstream. Got a lot of threats, verbal threats through Facebook. And as you can see, Rona Kainan, famous singer, she had to cancel one of her shows because she was really scared for her life. She expressed grief for innocent Palestinians who were killed, and she got threats through Facebook. I read some of them. I don't even want to quote them because they were just mean, scary, and just I'm not gonna quote them. I'm gonna try not to quote them. And she just decided that she can't do a show. She was supposed to perform in Haifa in front of thousands of people, but she said I can't do it because she was just scared for her life. Another artist, a comedian, a famous comedian, she also expressed her opinion, and she got fired from a commercial campaign.
Right.
So there's also...
We see her now, Orna Banak.
Yes, so there's a financial aspect to it. Unlike American artists who have this big audience and they can allow themselves to be polarizing figures, they can allow themselves to take a stand. For example, Bruce Springsteen, he can support the Democratic Party and he's not afraid to lose the Republican audience, right?
Right.
Here in Israel, you can't do that. You have such a small audience and you want to be as mainstream as you can. So this creates a situation in which Israeli artists are only entertainers. They can't really be leading ideological figures.
Because it will hurt them not only economically, but also, as you said, threats to their lives.
Yeah, well, threats to their lives, sorry for that, threats to their lives is that, it's such a short way from becoming from a verbal threat to a physical one. And we saw in many left protests where the extreme right came to this protest, and they showed physical threats as well. So that's where it became problematic during this campaign, this operation, where you felt like you should really be physically scared if you express an opinion.
But at the end of the day, a lot of people will say, maybe the media and the culture correspondents are, making this much bigger of a story than it is. It's at the end of the day, it's a handful of extremists led by another extreme music, the Shadow, he's the part of the rap duo and so forth.
But that's the thing, it's really hard in social media to really differentiate between something that is esoteric and something that is a real threat. Because everything that is loud enough gets a bigger platform, and you don't really know how much it represents the reality.
Right.
But I do feel that in this operation, we saw how it grew bigger and bigger. And the problem is that it's not this kind of behavior is not only supported by the extremes, because if you see Orna Banai, the comedian, the fact that she was fired from a campaign means that these extremists have their impact. They manage to impact other big companies. So, and also the culture minister, she also expressed criticism over Israeli artists who expressed their opinion against the campaign.
Criticism meaning not telling them they can't talk about it.
She said that she would prefer them not to talk.
Oh,
yeah, so she actually wrote that on Facebook. Very well-known filmmakers. And I also see all the other Israeli artists who are known abroad and express their opinion. So many critics said, you can't express this kind of opinion during war because you're hurting Israel. And I actually think that you're not hurting Israel when you're showing we're still a plural society, and that we allow a bunch of opinions and not just one opinion. There was this very negative story about Israel in Vice magazine, a very popular magazine, a story that shows the escalation of racism over social media in Israel. So it's really important for us during this time, actually, to show that we have multiple opinions and that we're not just one side of the story, and not that and the fact that every Israeli artist who's successful abroad is becoming an ambassador, a reluctant ambassador, I'm not sure. I mean, we should have them as well, but we should also have Israelis abroad who are showing the opposite opinion.
Or
to show
be allowed to say their opinion.
Whatever their opinion is, exactly. And not act as ambassadors, because they're artists, they're not ambassadors.
Gabi brought to us many headlines from Hollywood coming out throughout the operation. Penelope Cruz, Rihanna, Selena Gomez, for good and for bad. Many of them had to reiterate after they would tweet free Palestine or so forth, would have to then either issue an apology or reiterate that they're actually looking at the Israeli civilian population as well and expressing remorse.
Yeah, and you could also see Jon Stewart, once he expressed his criticism on Israel, he did another show where he showed that everybody, it doesn't matter what you're going to say in this matter, everybody's going to be mad at you. It's not a consensus in any way. But we could see that the criticism on Israel, if you're looking at the younger ages, the liberal ages, they're criticizing Israel. The ones who are supportive of Israel are the older artists like John Voight, Joan Rivers. I think that they're old enough to see Israel growing from a small, young country to a successful country. So they have this proportion that younger artists don't have. But for us, it's a problem. For Israel, it's a problem because the younger generation. What they see Jon Stewart, they see Rihanna, Selena Gomez, and they know that if they consider themselves liberal, they don't want to be on Israel's side.
But there's something positive actually about this, because we are always self-critical because that's who we are. But the fact that these artists had to reiterate over and over again their messages. By the way, diplomats did the same.
Right.
There are some European prime ministers that had to do it, which means that the Israeli pressure or the Jewish pressure works.
And is that a good thing? If
think it's a
the
great
Jewish
thing.
pressure works, it doesn't sound that good. You see, it doesn't sound right.
At the end of the
it sounds
day,
like you can't say anything about Israel because you're going to get a lot of criticism. But it doesn't. I'm not sure it's good for our image to show that we put all this pressure when someone tries to criticize us, and that we can't accept any criticism.
Speaking of pressure, just quickly, Chen, before we break off, there is going to be some music shows and concerts that will have to cancel, even though so far we're in a ceasefire, but there's been many that have canceled, Backstreet Boys and so forth here in Israel. Lana Del Rey is coming up. Is that still happening?
That's still happening, and Lady Gaga is coming. It was supposed to be an unprecedented summer live show-wise, but Neil Young canceled, Backstreet Boys canceled, and many others canceled. I'm hoping that Lana Del Rey is coming and that Lady Gaga is coming.
So is Gabby. Gabby's very much hoping.
I'm a big fan.
But I have to say, this is going to have a long-term effect on this business because many artists who were supposed to come maybe in 2015, they're seeing what's happening. They're probably thinking, I'm not going to take this risk of organizing a show, planning, putting it on my tour, and then canceling it a week before.
Well,
so it's a long-term damage, yeah.
Chen Lieberman, thank you for joining us. Avital Leibovich, thank you for being here. Gabby, thank you. That's all for today. We're going to be back, of course, with more I-24 News Morning Edition tomorrow. I'm Yael Wissner-Levy. Next up are the headlines.